The ballroom went quiet. The second Isaiah pushed the service door open, and Darius Vance was the one who laughed first.
They really let the maintenance guy in through the front tonight.
Charcoal dust on the knees of Isaiah's work pants. A zip tie still looped through his belt. 300 guests in Beverly Hills silk, and not one of them looked away from him. They looked at him, the way you look at a stain on a tablecloth. Imani felt her own smile lock into place, the one she'd been wearing since she was 9. She pressed her thumbnail hard into her palm and kept it there. Her sister Chanel, radiant in crimson, leaned toward the woman beside her and said it loud enough to carry.
That's the groom. Can you imagine?
Isaiah didn't flinch. He reached into his vest, checked a silver pocket watch, worn smooth at the edges, and slid it back like a man who had somewhere better to be. Nobody in that room knew what that watch meant. In 1 month, all of them would. Stay with this one. And before we go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight. And tell me this. Have you ever watched a family decide a person's worth by the size of their bank account? Type it below. Because not every broke-looking man is broke. And not every crowded, glittering life is a happy one. Sit back, and let me take you back 1 month, to the morning it all started. The Robinson house in Baldwin Hills had 2 brides getting ready under one roof that morning. And only one of them was being treated like a bride. Chanel sat in the center of the front room, in a chair somebody had actually decorated, gold ribbon wrapped around the arms, and 3 women fussed over the hem of her gown like the hem was a newborn. Somebody had brought her a mimosa. Somebody else was reading her the seating chart out loud so she wouldn't have to lift her eyes. Imani was in the back bedroom, the one that used to be a storage room, dressing herself. Nobody had wrapped ribbon around anything in there. There was a mirror with a crack running corner to corner that the family had been meaning to replace since before their mother died. And Imani did her makeup in the half of it that still worked. She'd bought the dress herself, off the clearance rack at a bridal outlet in Inglewood, $110 marked down from $400, and she'd taken it in at the waist with her own hands 2 nights before. Because there was no money in the wedding budget for a tailor, not her half of the budget, anyway. Her father knocked once and came in without waiting. Reginald Robinson was a tall man who had spent 30 years making other people feel small, and he had never once needed to raise his voice to do it. He looked at his older daughter in her clearance dress, and his face did the thing it always did around her. It settled. Like the sight of her cost him something, and he decided to pay it quietly. "You remember where you came from today," he said. "Don't embarrass this family." "Yes, Daddy. The Vances are important people. Chanel's marrying up. You understand what that means for all of us." He straightened his cuff. "You're marrying a handyman. So keep your part small and keep it quiet." "Yes, Daddy." He'd found Isaiah for her. That was the part that still didn't sit right in her chest. 3 months ago, Reginald had announced at dinner that he'd arranged both weddings, same day, one venue, to save money, and that Imani's husband would be a young man named Isaiah Sterling, who did electrical and repair work and came from people with nothing. He'd said it like he was telling her the weather. Chanel had laughed into her napkin. Imani had sat there with her fork in her hand and understood, all at once, exactly what she was worth to her own father. Enough to marry off cheap, so the real money could go to the daughter who mattered. She could have refused. She'd turned it over in her mind 100 times since. But she was 29, buried under $47,000 of nursing school she'd taken on, and never finished paying because she'd left school to keep this house running after her mother got sick. She had $140 in her checking account. She had nowhere on earth to go that wasn't this house, and this house had made her into someone who said yes. So she'd said yes to the handyman. She'd met Isaiah exactly twice before the wedding. The first time, he'd come to the house to look at it, and Reginald had made him wait on the porch, like a delivery. Imani had brought him a glass of water because nobody else was going to, and he'd taken it and said, "Thank you," and actually meant it, which was rare enough in that house that she'd noticed. He was maybe 32. Big hands. A quiet way of holding still. There was grease worked into the creases of his knuckles that no amount of scrubbing was going to lift, and he'd caught her looking at it and turned his hands over, palms up, not ashamed, just showing her. Occupational, he'd said. And that was the whole of their first conversation. The second time was to sign paperwork, and he'd worn a clean shirt, and Chanel had asked him in front of everyone whether he owned a suit. And he'd said no, he didn't. And Chanel had laughed. Like that answer was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. Now it was the morning of, and Chanel appeared in the doorway of the storage room in full crimson, her makeup done by a professional, and looked her sister up and down. "You're not really wearing that." "It's what I have. God, Imani." Chanel almost sounded sorry for a second, and then didn't. "You know Daddy's putting the Vances at the head table, and your little handyman is going to be sitting right there next to Darius. Try not to make it weird." She reached out and adjusted a strand of Imani's hair, a gesture that would have looked like love from across the room. "I really do hope you're happy. I mean, somebody has to marry the poor ones." "Thank you, Chanel. I'm serious. Don't cry at the ceremony. It photographs badly and the photographer's for me." She left. Imani stood in the working half of the mirror and practiced the smile one more time. The venue was a hotel ballroom in Beverly Hills that Reginald could not actually afford, which was the entire point. 2 ceremonies stacked back to back, Chanel's first, of course, the real one, with the string quartet and the flower wall, and Darius Vance in a tuxedo that cost more than Imani's car. Darius came from money the way some people come from a particular town. It was the only thing about him you needed to know to understand everything else. His father owned commercial real estate across 3 counties, and Darius had never in his life been told no by anyone whose name he bothered to remember. He found Imani near the coat check 20 minutes before the doors opened, and he found her on purpose. "The other bride," he said, looking at her dress the way you'd read a price tag. "Channel showed me a picture of your guy, the electrician." He smiled. He had a good smile, and he knew it. Bold, marrying a man whose entire net worth fits in a toolbox. "That takes something. I couldn't do it. He's a good man. I'm sure he is. Good men are cheap. That's sort of the problem with them." He plucked a champagne flute off a passing tray and didn't offer her one. "That truck of his has more miles on it than his bank account has dollars." I looked him up. "Sterling. There's real sterlings in this city. You know, the View Park ones. The old money. Your guy is not those sterlings." He laughed. "Wouldn't that be something?" He walked away before she could answer, which was how he preferred all his conversations. Chanel's ceremony went the way expensive things go. Smooth. Photographed. 100 phones held up. When Darius kissed her, the room made the sound rooms make, and Reginald stood in the front row with his chin up like a man who had built something. Then they reset the flowers for the second ceremony, and the guests who stayed did so mostly out of curiosity, the way people slow down for a wreck. Isaiah came in through the wrong door. He'd come straight from a job. Later, Imani would learn that a woman in Limert Park had lost power to half her house the night before, an 81-year-old woman on an oxygen concentrator, and Isaiah had been under her house until 4 in the morning and back at 7 to finish. and he had driven to his own wedding without time to change, because a woman on oxygen came first. But nobody in that ballroom knew it. All they saw was a man in charcoal work pants and a dust-streaked vest walking into a Beverly Hills wedding through the service entrance. And Darius Vance laughing, and Chanel saying, "Can you imagine?" and the whole glittering crowd turning to look at the stain on the tablecloth. And that is where I started this story. That is the moment. Now watch what the room could not see. Isaiah crossed the floor to the front, past every silk dress and every held-up phone, and he did not hurry, and he did not shrink. And when he reached Imani, he did something no one expected. He took her hand. Not for the ceremony, before it. He took her hand like the two of them were the only people there, and he leaned in, and under all that laughter he said one quiet thing, just for her. "I'm sorry I'm late. There was a woman who needed her power back. I'll tell you about her sometime." He looked at her dress, the clearance dress she'd taken in herself, and he said, "You look like somebody who's been carrying too much for too long. You can put some of it down now." Imani had not cried at her mother's funeral. She'd been too busy holding the family up to fall apart, and she'd learned young that her tears were an inconvenience to people. So she'd stopped having them where anyone could see. She did not cry now either. But something behind her ribs moved, some old, locked thing, and for 1 second in that hostile room, she forgot to hold her smile in place and just looked at him. Chanel, from the second row, stage whispered, "Is he going to fix the lights while he's up there?" And the crowd laughed again. Isaiah didn't turn around. He reached into his vest and checked the pocket watch, the silver one worn smooth, and Chanel saw it and couldn't help herself. "Oh my God, is that a pawn shop special? Did you propose with a lottery ticket too?" He put the watch away. He looked at the officiant. "We can start," he said. They were married in 11 minutes. No quartet, no flower wall. When it was done, Reginald did not come to congratulate them. Darius raised his champagne in a mock toast and drank it alone. And Chanel came close enough to hug her sister for the photograph nobody was taking, and said into her ear, "Sweet as sugar, enjoy your little life," before she pulled back smiling. Isaiah's mother was the only one who cried. She was a small woman in a Sunday dress that had been to a lot of Sundays, sitting alone in the back row, and when the 11 minutes were over, she came up the aisle and took Imani's face in both her hands. Like Imani was something precious that had finally been returned to her. "I'm Clara," she said. "I'm his mama. And you, baby, are the best thing that's walked into this family in a long time. Whatever they made you feel today, you let it go. You're ours now." Nobody had said anything like that to Imani in 11 years. They left in Isaiah's truck. It did have a lot of miles on it. Darius had been right about that, if nothing else. It rattled over the speed bumps in the hotel lot, and one of the windows only rolled down halfway, and the whole thing smelled like copper wire and coffee. Imani sat in her clearance wedding dress in the passenger seat of a handyman's truck and watched the Beverly Hills Hotel shrink in the side mirror and waited to feel like her life was over. It didn't come. What came instead, somewhere around the 10 freeway, was the strangest feeling, quiet. Actual quiet, the kind she hadn't had in years, no one to manage, no one to keep happy, no mimosa to fetch. Isaiah drove with one hand and didn't fill the silence with anything, and after a while he said, "You hungry? There's a place on Crenshaw does oxtails on Saturdays. Hole in the wall, best you ever had. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm asking if you're hungry." She thought about it. She's was. "Yes," she said. "I'm hungry," Isaiah said, and smiled at the road. That's a start. The apartment was a studio in Crenshaw, 1 room and a kitchenette, and Isaiah apologized for it before they even got up the stairs. It's small, he said, key in the door. I want you to know it's not forever. But it's clean, and it's paid, and nobody here is going to make you feel like a guest in your own home. She stepped inside and understood something about him in the first 3 seconds. There was a shelf he'd built himself, uneven at one end, and on it a row of paperbacks about electrical code, and one about the history of Black Los Angeles, and a framed photo of an old woman with fierce eyes. There was a single good chair by the window, positioned to catch the morning. There was a jar of wildflowers on the 2-person table, grocery store wildflowers, but somebody had gone and bought flowers for a wife he barely knew. You bought flowers, she said. Ma said a home should have something growing in it. He set down her bag. She was right about most things. That first week Imani kept waiting for the other version of him to show up. The version her father had, the version Darius had, the one that turned cold the second you stopped being useful. It didn't come. Isaiah left before 6 most mornings, came back after dark smelling of other people's houses, and every single day he asked her how her day had been, and then actually stopped moving to listen to the answer. She hadn't known that was a thing a person could do. Mama Clara came by on the 3rd day with a pot of greens and a way of filling a room with warmth, and she told Imani stories while they cooked. About Isaiah at 7, taking apart the toaster to see how it worked, and putting it back together so it worked better. About his grandmother, the fierce-eyed woman in the photo, Eula Sterling, who'd raised him summers when things at home got hard. His grandmother had money, Imani asked, because the way Clara said the name had weight to it. Clara went quiet in a way that Imani filed away and didn't understand yet. His grandmother had a lot of things, she said carefully. Money was the least of them. She had a spine, she had land. She turned the greens. Isaiah will tell you when he's ready. It's his to tell. Imani let it go. She was good at letting things go. It was the skill the Robinson house had taught her best. On the 6th day, the phone rang while Isaiah was in the shower. His phone, face up on the table. And Imani didn't look on purpose, but the name lit up the screen anyway. Cornelius Freeman, ESQ. She'd have thought nothing of it, except that when Isaiah came out and saw the missed call, something crossed his face that she'd never seen on him. Not fear exactly. The careful stillness of a man standing at the edge of something. He called the number back out on the landing where she couldn't hear. He was out there 20 minutes. When he came back in, he sat down across from her at the little table with the wildflowers, and he looked at her for a long moment, like he was deciding how much of a door to open. My grandmother died 3 weeks ago, he said. Eula, the woman in the picture. Isaiah, I'm so sorry. We buried her before the wedding. I didn't tell you because you and I were still strangers, and it felt like a lot to put on somebody. He turned the pocket watch over in his hands, the silver one. This was hers, her husband's before that. She gave it to me the last time I saw her, and she said, "Hold on to this, because when the time comes, it's going to matter more than it looks like it matters." What did she mean? That was Cornelius on the phone. He was her lawyer for 40 years. Isaiah set the watch down between them. She left a will. He didn't explain all of it that night. He gave it to her in pieces over the following days. The way you feed information to someone you're learning to trust. And each piece rearranged what Imani thought she'd married. Eula Sterling had come to Los Angeles in 1961, with $200 and a refusal to be told where she could and couldn't buy. She'd bought her first house in View Park, when a black woman buying in View Park was a small act of war, and then she'd bought another, and another, quietly, over 60 years, back when the neighborhood was redlined, and the prices were held down by the same racism that had tried to keep her out. She'd held that property through every decade while the city changed around it. And by the time she died, the land she'd assembled was worth, Cornelius estimated, somewhere north of $11 million. $11 million, Imani said. She had to sit down, and she was already sitting down. On paper, Isaiah said. Here's the part that matters. It's not money in an account somewhere. It's houses and land, and it's tied up, and it's a fight. This is the part I want you to slow down for. Because it's the part most people never learn until they're standing in the middle of it. And it costs families everything. When a person dies and leaves property behind, that property does not just hand itself to whoever's named in the will. It goes through a court process called probate. A judge has to prove the will is real. Somebody has to be officially appointed to manage the estate, pay the dead person's debts, count everything, and only then hand out what's left. That appointed person is called the executor, and until the court gives them a document called letters testamentary, they have no legal power to touch a thing. The estate is frozen. The houses sit there. Nobody can sell them. Nobody can borrow against them. Nobody can move in. In California, on an estate that size, that freeze can last a year. Sometimes 2. Eula Sterling had named Isaiah as her executor, and as the person who would inherit the bulk of it. So you're rich, Imani said. No, Isaiah said, and he said it hard, because he'd clearly thought about this a lot. On paper, someday, maybe. Right now I'm a man with a truck and a toolbox and a court date. Right now I can't touch $1 of it. If I stopped working tomorrow, we couldn't pay for this apartment. That's not rich. That's a promise the government hasn't decided to keep yet. Then, why does your face do that when Cornelius calls? Isaiah was quiet. Because I'm not the only one Eula had, he finally said. My father's brother, my uncle, Terence Sterling. He's spent the last 3 weeks telling the court the will is a fake. That Eula wasn't in her right mind. That I pressured an old woman into signing away what should have been split. He rubbed his face. He's got lawyers. Real ones, the kind that bill by the hour and don't stop. If it comes out that Eula's fortune is landing on a handyman from Crenshaw, every person who wants a piece of it is going to come looking. And the first thing people like that do is look for pressure points. He looked at her when he said it, and Imani understood. Me, she said. I'm a pressure point. You're my wife. The minute the world knows what I'm sitting on, you become the easiest way to hurt me or to get to it. Your father would suddenly love me. Your sister would suddenly want to visit. Darius Vance would suddenly remember my name. And I would spend every day wondering which smile was real. He shook his head. I wanted one thing in my life that money hadn't gotten its hands into. I married you as a man with nothing. On purpose. Because I wanted to know if we could be real before any of this landed. That was selfish. I see that now, but it wasn't a lie to trap you. It was a wall I built to keep the wrong people out, and I forgot to tell you the wall was there. Imani sat with that for a long time. You should have told me, she said finally. Not because I'd take the money, because it was mine to know. You decided for me. Everybody in my life has always decided for me. My father decided who I'd marry. My sister decides how I feel. And now you decided what I get to know about my own marriage. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. Don't do it again. I won't. I mean it, Isaiah. No more deciding for me. If people come, let them come. I've been managed my whole life by people who called it protecting me. I would rather have the truth and the danger than a comfortable lie. He looked at her like she'd said something that reset the ground under him. Okay, he said, the truth and the danger. Deal. The call from Chanel came on a Sunday, bright and poisoned. Imani, baby sister. Chanel never called her baby sister except when she wanted something to hurt. The Vances are throwing an engagement gala for me and Darius at the house in Bel Air. Everyone's coming. You have to be there. I don't think that's a good idea. Why are you ashamed? There it was, quick as a snake. You married who you married, Imani. Own it. Come show everybody your new life. Bring the handyman. Wear something. A pause, calculated, unless you can't. Unless it's too much for you. That's fine. I'll just tell people you were too embarrassed to face me. Imani knew the trap because she'd been raised inside it. Say no, and Chanel would spend the evening telling 300 people that poor, sad Imani couldn't bear to come. Say yes, and walk into a room built to humiliate her. There was no door that didn't cost. I'll come, she said. She told Isaiah about it that night, expecting him to talk her out of it. He didn't. Do you want to go? He asked. No. Then why are you going? Because if I don't, she wins the story. She gets to say I hid. Imani surprised herself with how clearly it came out. I'm tired of being the villain in a story I didn't write. Just once I want to stand in that room and let them see they didn't break me. Isaiah was quiet for a moment. Then we go, he said. But I want you to hear me. If I lose my temper in there, it's not because they got to me. It's because somebody put their hands on my wife. You understand the difference? Nobody's going to put their hands on me. I hope you're right. The Vance house in Bel Air was the kind of house that exists to make other people feel poor. Valet, a tent bigger than most apartments, a champagne fountain, an actual fountain, running gold. Imani wore a deep sapphire blue dress she'd found for $60 and pressed until it looked like more. And Isaiah wore the one clean button-down he owned and a borrowed jacket that didn't quite fit in the shoulders. And they walked in together through the front door this time, and the whole room did the thing again. The turn, the look. Chanel descended on them in crimson. Of course, always crimson, and she'd brought reinforcements. A woman on her arm, tall, sharp, beautiful in the way that costs money to maintain, in a dress the color of a bruise. Deep purple. Imani, you came. Chanel's smile could have cut glass. And you brought your project. This is Bianca. Bianca Payne. She's a dear, dear friend of Darius's family. Bianca, this is my sister, the one I told you about. She married an electrician. A handyman? Actually, Bianca said, and looked at Isaiah. The way you look at furniture, you're deciding whether to keep. How do you two even meet? Did he come to fix something? Her father arranged it, Chanel said, delighted, to save money. 2 weddings, 1 day. Guess which one got the string quartet? The women laughed. Isaiah didn't. Imani felt the old smile try to climb onto her face, and for the first time in her life, she let it fall off instead. She looked Bianca dead in the eye and said nothing. And there is a kind of silence that is louder than any answer, and Bianca felt it and didn't like it. Darius arrived with a drink already in his hand. He clapped Isaiah on the shoulder like they were old friends, which was its own kind of insult. Sterling, you came. Good man. He leaned in, conspiratorial, loud enough for the circle to hear. Listen, no hard feelings about the wedding. I was just having fun. Between us, though, real talk. You ever think about what she deserves? He nodded at Imani. Girl like that, she could have done better. Not your fault. You are what you are. But a woman needs a certain kind of life, you know. She needs a man who can give her things. He sipped. You can't give her things, Sterling. That's just math. Isaiah looked at him for a long moment. The room seemed to lean in a little. You keep saying things, Isaiah said quietly, like a life is a pile of things. That's the difference between you and me. And it's the only difference that's ever mattered. Darius blinked, not sure if he'd been insulted, and decided to laugh instead. Poetic. Broke. But poetic. He wandered off toward the fountain. Imani found the ladies' room to breathe, and Chanel followed her in, because Chanel could never leave a wound alone. "You're doing that thing," Chanel said, leaning against the marble counter. "That thing where you stand there all quiet and dignified and make everybody feel like they're the ones being cruel. You've done it since we were kids. Mama loved it. Everybody always loved poor patient Imani." Her voice thinned. "You want to know why I can't stand you? It's not the handyman. I could forgive the handyman. It's that you never fight and you always win anyway. I fought for everything. I clawed for Daddy's attention, and you just sat there being good, and he felt guilty about you, and that guilt was worth more than everything I ever did." "That's not true, Chanel. It doesn't matter if it's true. It's how it felt." She pushed off the counter. "Enjoy the party. I really do hope you're happy in your little apartment with your little man. Somebody has to be poor. Might as well be the good one." She left. Imani gripped the edge of the sink and looked at herself in a mirror that had no crack in it, a rich person's mirror. And for the first time she noticed she wasn't practicing the smile anymore. She'd stopped somewhere in the last 3 weeks and hadn't realized. She went back out, and that was when it happened. She was crossing the floor toward Isaiah when Bianca stepped into her path, drink in hand, and it was not an accident. Nothing Bianca did was an accident. The champagne glass tipped. Not a splash. A pour, deliberate and full, down the front of Imani's $60 sapphire dress. And then Bianca's hand opened, and the glass dropped and shattered on the marble at their feet. "Oh," Bianca said, flat, bored. "Look what you did. You bumped me." She raised her voice for the room. "She bumped right into me. Somebody get a towel. And clean this glass up, would you? You're closest." She looked at Imani, standing in her ruined dress. "Well, it's broken. Pick it up." 300 people watched. Nobody moved. This is the part the story wants you to remember. The same way that Ballroom wanted you to remember Isaiah in the doorway. The silence of a crowd is its own kind of violence. Not one of those beautiful people stepped forward. A few of them lifted their phones. Imani looked down at the broken glass. And then she did something that later she couldn't fully explain. She knelt. Not because Bianca told her to, because there was an 81-year-old memory in her of her own grandmother telling her that you clean up broken glass before a child steps in it. And there were children of the guests running somewhere in that house. And Imani Robinson had spent her whole life being the person who took care of the thing everyone else was too proud to touch. She knelt in her ruined dress and began carefully to gather the glass, and a piece of it opened her palm. Not deep, but blood, bright against the champagne-wet marble, and she heard Bianca laugh. And she heard Chanel's voice somewhere say, "Oh my God, she's bleeding on the floor." And she heard the particular quality of a rich crowd enjoying itself. And she kept picking up the glass, because her hand was already down there, and a child could still step on it. Then a shadow came over her, and hands, and Isaiah was on his knees beside her, on the marble in his borrowed jacket. He didn't shout. Everyone had braced for shouting. Instead, he took her bleeding hand in both of his, gently, the way you'd hold something that mattered, and he pressed his own clean handkerchief against the cut, and he looked up at Bianca and Chanel and Darius from the floor with an expression that made the laughter die in the room, all on its own. "Say it again," he said, very quiet. "The part where you told my wife to pick up the glass you dropped. Say it again for me." Nobody said it again. Isaiah helped Imani to her feet. He wrapped the handkerchief tight around her palm. And then he did a strange thing. He looked at the crowd, all those phones, and instead of the anger they wanted, he gave them something worse. He gave them the truth about themselves. "Every one of you watched a woman kneel to clean up glass so your kids wouldn't get cut," he said. and every one of you filmed it instead of helping. You'll go home tonight and tell yourselves you were at a beautiful party." He tucked Imani's arm into his. "You were at this, whatever this was." He walked her out. Chanel called after them something about being dramatic. Isaiah didn't turn around. In the truck, Imani started shaking, and it wasn't the cut. "I'm okay," she said, before he could ask. "It's not the hand, it's that I almost stayed down there. I almost let her stand over me, and I almost said sorry. 29 years old and my body still knows how to fold." She pressed the handkerchief harder. "I hate that they made me remember how good I am at kneeling." "You knelt to keep a kid from getting cut," Isaiah said. "That's not folding. Folding is what everybody standing up was doing." He pulled out of the Bel Air gates. "You want to know the difference between you and every person in that room? You were the only one who was actually good in there tonight. They just had better dresses." She almost smiled. Then her stomach turned over, sudden and wrong, and she made him pull over on Sunset, and she was sick on the shoulder of the road in her ruined sapphire dress. She'd been tired for a week. Tired in a way sleep didn't touch. She'd told herself it was the wedding, the move, the stress. She sat back in the truck with the taste of it in her mouth, and did the arithmetic she'd been avoiding. And her hand drifted to her stomach before her mind had finished the sentence. They bought a test at a 24-hour pharmacy on the way home. Isaiah waited outside the bathroom door of the little Crenshaw studio, not saying anything. And when Imani opened the door, she was holding it, and she was crying. Finally, the tears she'd saved up for 11 years all arriving at once for a reason that wasn't grief. "I'm pregnant," she said. Isaiah sat down on the floor, just sat down where he was standing, his back against the wall, like his legs had made the decision without him. And then this man who never lost his composure put his face in his hands, and his shoulders shook. And Imani got down on the floor with him, and the two of them sat on the linoleum of a one-room apartment that some people would call nothing. And it was the richest room in the city. "A baby," he kept saying. "We're going to have a baby." "In a studio apartment," she said, half laughing, half crying. "With $47,000 of my debt, and $11 million you can't touch. We'll figure it out." He took her face in his hands the way his mother had at the wedding. "I promise you, we'll figure it out. Our kid is going to grow up, knowing exactly what they're worth. And it's not going to have anything to do with a bank account. You hear me? That's the one thing I know how to give." Imani had been working the whole time. That was a thing about her the Robinsons had always managed to forget. She'd been a per diem patient care aide at a clinic on Martin Luther King Boulevard for 3 years, picking up shifts, good with the old folks, the one who stayed past clock-out to sit with someone who was scared. It was the closest she'd gotten to the nursing career she'd left school, owing money for. Her supervisor was a woman named Denise, who managed by fear and had never liked that the patients liked Imani. When Imani, being honest, being the kind of person who tells the truth even when it costs her, disclosed that she was pregnant and asked whether she could be moved off the heaviest lifting for a few weeks, Denise cut her hours in half by the end of the day and started scheduling her for the shifts nobody could survive on. "You can't do the lifting, you're no good to me on the floor," Denise said. "I'll put you on call, don't expect much." Imani almost accepted it. That was the reflex, the fold, the yes ma'am that the Robinson house had installed in her. But she went home and told Isaiah, and Isaiah didn't say a word. He just picked up his phone and made a call, and an hour later a woman named Auntie Yolanda was sitting at their 2-person table. Yolanda Freeman was Cornelius's sister, a retired employment attorney, who still did community clinics on Saturdays because, she said, The law was worth nothing if it only visited people who could afford it. She listened to the whole thing with her hands folded, and then she leaned forward. Here is the second thing I need you to slow down for, because Imani didn't know it, and most people don't, and not knowing it is exactly how they get away with it. In this country, it is against federal law to punish a woman at work for being pregnant. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act has said so since 1978. And as of 2023, a newer law, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, goes further. It requires most employers to make reasonable accommodations for pregnancy. Things like being moved off heavy lifting, exactly what Imani had asked for, unless it would cause the business real hardship. Cutting a woman's hours the same day she discloses a pregnancy and asks for light duty is not management. It is retaliation, and it is illegal. And the agency that enforces it is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and it does not cost a dime to file a complaint with them. They count on you not knowing, Yolanda said. They count on you being grateful for whatever they leave you. A pregnant woman who knows her rights is the most dangerous thing in that building, and Denise knows it, which is exactly why she moves fast, before you can think. I don't want to lose the job entirely, Imani said. I need it. You won't, that's the point. The law is on your side, not hers. We document everything, we send one letter, and I promise you Denise's whole tone is going to change. Yolanda smiled. I've written that letter 300 times. It works 300 times. It worked. Imani kept her hours and her light duty, and Denise never quite looked her in the eye again. And something shifted in Imani that had nothing to do with the money. And everything to do with the discovery that she had been walking around her whole life with rights she'd never been told she had, standing on ground that was always hers. Nobody had ever handed her the map. She started reading after that, about the probate case, about employment law, about tenant rights, about the history of the land Eula Sterling had assembled, red line maps of the very neighborhoods her own family had been priced out of and priced back into. The nursing student who'd never finished had a mind that had just been waiting for a door, and Isaiah watched her find it and fell the rest of the way in love with her, quietly, the way he did everything. One Saturday he took her with him on a job, and it turned out to be the woman from the night before their wedding. The 81-year-old in Limert Park, the one on the oxygen concentrator, the reason Isaiah had walked into a Beverly Hills ballroom in dust-streaked work pants and let a room full of strangers decide he was garbage rather than leave her in the dark. Her name was Miss Odessa. She had a photograph of Isaiah as a boy on her mantle because she'd known Eula, because everybody in a certain stretch of Black Los Angeles had known Eula, and she took one look at Imani and said, "Oh, he found a good one. Eula would have liked you." She didn't like much. She said it like a diagnosis. Imani watched her husband work that afternoon. Watched him check the concentrator's backup battery twice without being asked. Watched him leave his own number taped inside the breaker box, in handwriting big enough for old eyes. Watched him refuse the money. Miss Odessa tried to press into his hand and take instead. After 20 minutes of her insisting, a single jar of her fig preserves, so she wouldn't feel like a charity case. And Imani understood something she hadn't had words for. Her father had spent 30 years making people feel small in order to feel large. Isaiah spent his days making people feel safe and asking for nothing back but a jar of figs. That was the whole man. That was the entire net worth Darius Vance couldn't find when he looked him up. On the drive home, she put her hand on the back of his neck and didn't say anything. And he glanced over, and he didn't ask her to explain, because by then they were the kind of married where Some things didn't need saying. The pressure came the way Isaiah had said it would. From two directions at once, and they found each other, the way that kind of person always does. Terence Sterling, Isaiah's uncle, hired a private investigator to dig into Isaiah's life, looking for anything to feed the court, any evidence that Isaiah had manipulated a dying old woman. The investigator was not subtle. He asked questions around the Crenshaw apartment. He photographed the truck. And in the course of following the thread of Isaiah's marriage, he found Chanel Robinson, who was more than happy to talk about her sister for free, and Chanel, putting two and two together at the gala's aftermath, hearing the name Sterling and a lawyer and a will, went looking herself. She and Bianca sat in a wine bar in Culver City and traded pieces until they had most of a picture. "So the handyman isn't a handyman," Bianca said. "The handyman is going to inherit $11 million, Chanel said, and her hand shook on her glass. "And my father married my sister off to him for free, to save money, on me." She laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "Do you understand what happened? Imani won. Imani sat in that back bedroom being pathetic, and she won everything. And she doesn't even know it yet, or maybe she does. Maybe she's been laughing at all of us this whole time." She wasn't. Imani knew about the 11 million she couldn't touch, and thought about it about as often as she thought about the weather on Mars. But that's the thing about people like Chanel. They cannot imagine a person who wouldn't do exactly what they would do. "Here's what I think," Bianca said slowly, turning her glass. "I think if that will falls apart, if the uncle wins, your sister goes right back to nothing. And I happen to know the uncle's looking for people who'll say the marriage is a sham, a gold digger marriage. Handyman marries a broke girl the same week he finds out he's rich." She smiled. "Sounds like a scheme to me. Sounds like two people who planned it. That's not what happened." "Chanel," Bianca looked at her. "Do you want your sister to win or not?" Chanel was quiet for a long moment. Somewhere in her, the little girl who'd clawed for her father's attention and never gotten it made a decision that the woman would have to live with. "What do I have to say?" she said. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that Bianca Payne had her own reason for wanting into the Sterling money, and it had nothing to do with helping any uncle. Bianca had been sleeping with Darius Vance for 8 months, since before his engagement to Chanel. And 3 weeks ago, Bianca had learned she was pregnant, and Darius had told her to handle it quietly and promised her that the marriage to Chanel was a business arrangement between families, all image, nothing real, and that he'd take care of her. Bianca did not fully believe him. Bianca was a woman who liked to have more than one door, and a connection to $11 million was a very good second door. Cornelius Freeman came to the apartment on a Thursday with a briefcase and bad news, wearing a good suit. "Terence filed a supplemental claim," he told Isaiah, spreading papers on the two-person table where the wildflowers had been replaced with fresher ones. "Imani's doing now. He's alleging your marriage is evidence of a scheme, that you knew about the will before the wedding and married quickly to build a picture of a stable family man for the court. He's got a witness willing to testify the marriage isn't real." "Who?" Isaiah said, though he already knew the shape of it. "Your wife's sister." Imani set down the tea she'd been carrying. She did not throw it, though later she'd wish she had a more dramatic memory of the moment. She just set it down very carefully, because her hands wanted to do something, and she wouldn't let them. "Chanel is going to tell a court my marriage is fake," she said. "She's going to say she has knowledge that it was arranged for money and convenience. Which, Mr. Robinson arranged it, so there's a thread of truth she can pull." Cornelius folded his hands. "Here is where we are. I've been trying to keep this quiet, to protect you both, to let the probate move at its own pace and keep your name out of the papers. That strategy is finished. Terence has decided to make it loud. So now you have a choice, and it's yours to make, both of you, together. Tell us, Imani said. We can keep hiding. Keep your head down. Let me fight it slow. Hope the court sees through it eventually. Or, Cornelius looked at Isaiah. You step forward. You stop being the handyman who might be lying, and you become, publicly in full view, the executor Eula Sterling chose, standing on her documented, notarized, witnessed will. You let the whole city see exactly who you are, and dare your uncle to call an old woman's clearly stated wishes a fraud in the light. The witnessed will is strong, Isaiah. Eula had 3 doctors document her competence the week she signed it. She knew this fight was coming. She built it to survive. He tapped the papers. But if you step forward, there's no wall anymore. Everyone knows. Every person who ever looked down on you looks at you differently overnight, and you'll never again know for sure which smiles are real. That's the cost. Your grandmother's fight, or your privacy. You can't keep both. Isaiah looked at Imani. This was the man who'd built a wall to keep the world out, being asked to tear it down himself. And he didn't decide alone. That was the whole point of everything that had passed between them. He looked at his wife, and he waited. No more deciding for each other, Imani said softly. So I'll tell you what I think, and then you tell me, and then we choose. She sat down across from him. I spent my whole life hiding. Being small so I'd be safe. Folding so no one would swing at me. And it never once kept me safe, Isaiah. It just taught everyone that I was easy. Your grandmother didn't hide. She bought houses in a neighborhood that didn't want her, out loud, on purpose. She held them for 60 years, while people who hated her watched. She left you a fight because she thought you could win it, standing up. Imani reached across and put her hand over his. I don't want our child born to 2 people who hid. Step forward. Let them see you. Let them see us. I'm not scared of them anymore. I stopped being scared somewhere on the floor of that bathroom, and I'm not going back. Isaiah turned his hand over under hers, palm up, the way he had the first day they met, showing her the grease that wouldn't wash out, not ashamed. Then we step forward, he said, and he signed the papers Cornelius had brought, and the wall came down. The wedding of Chanel Robinson and Darius Vance, the real, expensive string quartet wedding, had been the first act of this whole thing. Now the Vances threw a second gala, a pre-wedding celebration at a downtown hotel, black tie. The society pages invited, because the Vances did nothing that couldn't be photographed. It was the kind of night designed to announce a merger of families and fortunes to everyone who mattered. Terence Sterling would be there. He'd made sure of it. He'd been telling anyone who'd listen that his fraudulent nephew's house of cards was about to fall. And he wanted an audience when it did. He'd even, in a move he thought was clever, made sure Isaiah and Imani received an invitation. Let the pretender show up, he thought. Let the whole room see the handyman crash a party he doesn't belong in, one last time, before the court buries him. He got his audience. He just cast the play wrong. Isaiah Sterling walked into that downtown ballroom in a midnight black suit, tailored, that Cornelius had insisted on, and paid for out of the estate's advance, the moment the court granted the first order. And he did not come in through a service door. He came through the front, and Imani was on his arm in a floor-length sapphire gown that made the crimson and the purple in that room look like what they were, which was loud. And behind them came Cornelius Freeman, Esquire, with a briefcase, and the whole room turned, the way rooms did around these two. Except this time the turn had a different quality, because a black tie crowd knows the cut of a real suit when it sees one, and something about the way the 3 of them entered did not read as poor. Darius reached them first, drink in hand, grinning, not yet understanding. "Sterling, you actually came." He looked Isaiah up and down, and a flicker of confusion crossed his face at the suit. "Nice jacket." "Rental?" "No," Isaiah said. Terence swept in before Darius could work out what was happening, a heavy man with Eula's chin and none of her spine, and he raised his voice for the room he'd assembled. "There he is. Everyone, this is my nephew, the handyman who convinced my mother, in her final confused months, to sign away the family's legacy to him. He was performing to the crowd, loving it. I've asked you all here as witnesses, frankly, because tonight the truth about this man and his little arranged marriage comes out, and I want you to see it." "Yes," Isaiah said. "Let's." He nodded to Cornelius. And Cornelius Freeman opened the briefcase. "My name is Cornelius Freeman. I was Eula Sterling's attorney for 41 years. His voice filled the room, unhurried, the voice of a man who had ended more fights than he'd started. This is her last will and testament, notarized, witnessed by 3 parties, executed in the presence of 2 physicians and a psychiatrist who documented, in writing, that Eula Sterling was of entirely sound mind on the day she signed it. She anticipated this challenge. She named it in the document itself." He held up a second paper. "And this is the order from the Superior Court of Los Angeles County, issued this week, granting Isaiah Sterling letters testamentary as executor of her estate. Not alleged. Not pending. Granted by a judge. This man is not a pretender to anything. He is the person a very sharp old woman chose on purpose, and the court has affirmed it." The room was very quiet now. As for the fraud allegation, Cornelius turned, without hurry, to Terence. "Mr. Sterling, you've told this court your nephew married for convenience, to fake a stable family. I'd remind you, on the record, that filing knowingly false claims in a probate proceeding is not a strategy. It's a crime. It's called fraud on the court. And the estate you're trying to steal from can and will pursue every dollar it costs to defend against you. Your own attorneys will confirm this if you'd like to call them, now." Terence tried, though. Men like Terence always try, because they've never in their lives been in a room they couldn't talk their way out of, and they don't recognize the one they're standing in until the floor is already gone. "That will was signed by a woman who didn't know what year it was," he said, louder, playing to the crowd he'd invited, the crowd that was no longer his. "I'm her son, blood. And you'd hand her life's work to this, a repairman off the street, over her own child." "Her own child," Cornelius repeated, and let it sit there a second. "Mr. Sterling, I sat with your mother the day she made this will. She talked about you for a long while. Do you know what she told me?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "She told me you came to see her exactly twice in the last 10 years of her life. Both times you needed money," she said, the boy she raised on the summers. The one who took the toaster apart and put it back together better. Called her every Sunday until the week she died, and never once asked her for $1, and fixed her stove 3 winters running for free. Cornelius closed the briefcase. She knew exactly what year it was. She knew exactly who her family was. That's the whole reason we're standing here. She counted the 2 of you, and she chose. Being blood was the one thing you had, and it turned out not to be enough, because she was measuring something you never bothered to have." Terence's mouth opened, and nothing came out. And then the second thing happened, because the night was a pressure cooker. And Cornelius had only released the first valve. Reginald Robinson had been standing at the edge of the crowd, and the words 11 million and executor and granted by a judge had rearranged his entire face. He crossed the floor toward his daughter and her husband with his arms half open, and the smile he wore was one Imani had never once received in 29 years. Isaiah. Son. He'd never called him son. I have to say, I always knew. I always saw something in you. Didn't I say so, Imani? Didn't I always say your husband was a special young man? He turned to the room, expansive now. This is my son-in-law, my daughter's husband. We are so proud to have the Sterling family joined to ours. Imani looked at her father for a long moment. You made me marry him to save money, she said. Not loud. The room heard it anyway. You put me in the back bedroom the morning of my wedding. You told me to keep my part small and quiet, so I wouldn't embarrass the family in front of the Vances. You didn't stand up when we married. You didn't come and shake his hand. She wasn't angry, which was somehow worse. And now you call him son. Imani, this isn't the place, Euro. It's exactly the place. You picked the place. You've been performing this family for a room your whole life, Daddy. So let's perform in front of this one. She held his eyes. Isaiah was the same man an hour ago that he is now. The only thing that changed is the number, and the number is the only thing you've ever been able to see. Chanel pushed forward then, and Chanel had chosen her lane weeks ago in a Culver City wine bar, and she was not smart enough to know it was the wrong one. She's lying, Chanel announced to the room. Their marriage is a fraud, everybody. It's arranged. I have proof. I'm prepared to testify. Euro. Channel. A new voice. Bianca's. Bianca Payne had been standing very still near the champagne, watching Darius across the room, watching him fail to look at her, watching him drape his arm around Chanel and play the delighted fiancé. The sterling money he'd mocked turned out to be real. And something in Bianca, some final door she'd been keeping open, swung shut. Because if the sterlings were real and the Vances were about to be embarrassed, and Darius still wouldn't so much as glance at her across a room where she was carrying his child, then Bianca Payne was done being the quiet second option. Chanel, honey, Bianca said, and her voice carried beautifully. She'd made sure of that. Before you testify about anybody's fake marriage, you should probably know about yours. Darius went white. Bianca, don't. I'm pregnant, Darius. She said it to the whole room, and she smiled while she said it, the smile of a woman lighting a match she'd been saving. 8 weeks. And before anybody does the math and feels sorry for Chanel, understand we've been together since a full year before your engagement. He told me it was a business marriage. Image only. Nothing real. She pulled out her phone. He put it in writing. Would you like me to read it, or would you like to read it yourselves? I made copies. The room came apart the way expensive rooms do, quietly and completely. 300 people all suddenly very interested in their own phones for a different reason than before. Chanel stood in the middle of it in her crimson dress and understood, all at once, everything. That the man she'd clawed her way toward had been laughing at her the whole time. That the sister she'd agreed to betray in a wine bar had never once schemed against her, had never needed to, because Chanel had been busy building her own ruin with both hands. She looked at Darius. She looked at Bianca. She looked at her father, who had already taken one instinctive step away from her, toward the sterling money, because Reginald Robinson would always step toward the money. And then Chanel looked at Imani. And for the first time in the whole story, there was nothing behind her face but a girl who had lost. Imani did not smile. This is important, and it's the part the story has been walking toward the whole time. She could have. God knows she'd earned it, and part of you, listening, wants the sister to twist the knife, and I understand that. I felt it too. But Imani had spent 29 years being taught that a person's worth is a scoreboard, that you win by watching someone else lose, and she had decided somewhere on a bathroom floor that she was done believing it. Winning by Chanel's rules would have made her Chanel, so she didn't smile. She just looked at her sister across the wreckage of the party, and what was in her face was not triumph. It was something Chanel had never gotten from anyone and didn't know how to receive. It was pity, the clean kind, the kind that doesn't look down. Darius was trying to talk to the room now, to Bianca, to Chanel, to anyone, his hands moving, his good smile finally useless. Reginald had arrived at Isaiah's elbow and was saying something about family, about moving forward, about how none of the earlier unpleasantness needed to define anything. Isaiah let him finish. Then he said, gently, and the gentleness was the worst part for Reginald, "You called me the maintenance guy. In that ballroom. You laughed." He shook his head. "No, that was Darius." "You didn't laugh, Mr. Robinson. You did something quieter. You looked at your daughter in $100 dress, and you decided she wasn't worth a real one." He put his hand over Imani's, where it rested on his arm. "You had a daughter who would have loved you for nothing, who did, for years, for free, while you spent it all on the one who was keeping score, and you sold her cheap to save $1. He looked at the man with no anger at all. "You didn't lose her tonight because I got rich. You lost her a long time ago in a back bedroom, and you never even noticed she was gone." He turned to Cornelius. "We're leaving. Terence, I'll see you in court, and you should bring your checkbook." He nodded once to the room, the whole silent, staring, beautiful room. "Thank you all for coming. You've been exactly who you are all night. That's a rare thing. Most people at least try to hide it." And Isaiah Sterling walked his pregnant wife out through the front door of a downtown ballroom in a midnight black suit, unhurried, and this time when 300 people watched them go, not one of them was laughing. Here is what happened after, because in real life the party is never the end. The party is just the night everyone finally sees the truth. The consequences come slower, and they come through paperwork, and paperwork is where the real justice in this world actually lives. Terence Sterling's fraud claim collapsed within a month. It could not survive 3 doctors, a psychiatrist, and a will Euler had built like a fortress precisely because she'd known her son's brother and known exactly what he'd try. Cornelius did not let it end there. On behalf of the estate, he pursued Terence for the legal costs of defending against a claim the court ultimately found had been filed in bad faith. And a man who had gambled on stealing $11 million found himself instead writing checks he could not comfortably afford for years. That is the thing people like Terence never until it's happening to them. The system is slow, and the system is frustrating. And the system, when you finally force it to look, does not care how sure you were that you deserved it. Darius Vance's engagement to Chanel did not survive the week. Neither did the merger of families that the whole downtown gala had been staged to announce, because the Vances discovered that the society pages had gotten hold of the more interesting version of the evening, and the Vances cared about the society pages more than they cared about Darius's feelings. Bianca Payne pursued him for child support, and got it, because a paternity test does not care about a good smile either. And Darius learned that the law can reach even men whose fathers own 3 counties, if the mother knows to ask and does not let herself be talked out of it. Whether Bianca was a good person is not a question this story can answer. She lit the match for her own reasons, not for Imani's sake. But the truth she told was still the truth, and sometimes justice arrives in the hands of someone who isn't doing it for justice. Take it anyway. Chanel is the one I've thought about most. It would be easy to leave her in the ballroom, ruined, and let you enjoy it. But that's the scoreboard talking, And this story is trying to teach you to put the scoreboard down. Chanel came to the Crenshaw apartment 3 months later. Alone, no crimson. She stood in the doorway of the little studio she'd have called nothing. And she looked at the shelf Isaiah had built, and the wildflowers on the table, and her sister's rounding belly, and something in her face that had been clenched since childhood came slightly loose. "I agreed to lie about you in court," she said. She'd clearly practiced it, and it still came out badly. "I want you to know I did that. Bianca talked me into it, but I said yes, and I would have done it. I need you to know the worst version before you decide anything about me." Imani let her stand there a moment. Not to punish her, just because some things need air. "Why?" she said finally. Not an accusation, a real question. "Because you were good and I couldn't stand it." Chanel's voice cracked on it. "Because Daddy gave me everything and looked at you like you were the one he loved. And I decided a long time ago that the only way to win was to make sure you never had anything. And you ended up with the only thing I actually wanted. Which was somebody who'd look at me the way he looks at you, and I didn't even know that was the thing until I watched you have it." She wiped her face, angry at herself. "I'm not asking to be forgiven. I'm not stupid. I'm asking if there's a version of the next 20 years where I'm not alone." And Imani, who had every right to close the door, thought about her mother, and about the child she was carrying, and about the fact that she was about to raise a person in a family, and what a family was supposed to be, and what it had been instead. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen," Imani said. "I'm never going to pretend, Chanel. That's over, the pretending. I did enough of it for both of us. So no, we're not going to be close. Not soon. Maybe not for a long time. You don't get the sister back that you never actually treated like one." She paused. "But you can come to Sunday dinner. Clara cooks. You'll behave, or you'll leave. And if you ever put a hand near my child's sense of what they're worth, you'll never see either of us again." She met her sister's eyes. "That's the door. It's open about 4 inches. That's more than you gave me, and it's the most I have." Chanel came to Sunday dinner. She behaved. It was, for a long time, awkward and stiff and small. But it was 4 inches, and 4 inches is a start. And Mama Clara's greens have reconciled harder cases than the Robinson sisters. "There is one more conversation I owe you. Because without it, this would just be a story about money changing hands. And it was never about that. The probate closed the following spring. The estate settled. Isaiah Sterling became, on paper, and then in fact, a wealthy man. And on the night the final order came through, Imani sat him down at the same 2-person table where the wildflowers still stood, and she said the thing she'd been holding since the 6th day of their marriage. "You lied to me," she said. "I know why. I even think the why was decent. But I want to say the whole thing out loud once, so it lives in the light and not in the walls of this marriage. You knew about a fortune and a fight and a court case. And you married me, and you let me believe I'd married a man with a truck and a toolbox. And you decided, by yourself, that I didn't need to know. You built a wall around me and called it protection. My father built walls around me and called it protection too. Every man who's ever managed me has called it that. Isaiah didn't defend himself. That was one of the things she'd married him for, the way he could sit still inside a hard truth without needing to escape it. "You're right," he said. "It was the same thing. Better intentions, same shape. I'm sorry." "I forgave you a while ago," Imani said. "Not because it didn't matter. Because it did, and I looked at all of it, the whole real weight of it, and I decided to stay anyway with my eyes open. That's the only forgiveness worth anything, the kind that sees the whole thing first." She took his hand, turned it over, palm up. The grease long gone now, but the habit's still there between them. But here's what stays: no more walls. Not around me, not around our child. If there's danger, we face it together. If there's a hard thing, I get told, I would rather have every hard truth than one more comfortable lie built for my own good. Do you understand me? The truth and the danger, he said. I remember the deal. The truth and the danger, she said. For the rest of it, they kept the Crenshaw apartment. People found that strange. A man worth $11 million, and the first thing everybody assumed he'd do was buy his way into the life the Vances had. The fountain, the tent, the room built to make other people feel poor. He didn't. He and Imani moved eventually, when the baby came, into one of Eula's own houses in View Park, the first one she'd ever bought. The small act of war, and they kept it in the family the way she'd wanted. And they used the estate the way Isaiah swore his grandmother would have. They paid off Imani's $47,000 of nursing debt in an afternoon. And then Imani went back and finished the degree she'd left, and became the nurse she'd been on her way to being before this family taught her to fold. She works at a clinic now, the kind that visits people who can't afford it. Because Auntie Yolanda was right that the law and the healing are both worth nothing if they only reach the people who can pay. Their daughter is 2 now. Her name is Eula. And when she is old enough to understand it, they are going to tell her the story of the pocket watch, and the will, and the back bedroom, and the broken glass on the marble floor. Not so she'll know her family had money, so she'll know exactly what a person is worth, and that it was never, not once, not for a single day, the number. I want to sit with you for a minute now, before we go, because I've been telling you this story a certain way on purpose, and you deserve to know why. I could have made this a story about revenge. It's the easier one to tell, and honestly, it's the one that gets more views. The poor girl turns out to have married a secret millionaire, and everyone who ever looked down on her ends up groveling, and we all get that hot, satisfying rush of watching arrogant people brought low. I gave you some of that, because I'm not going to pretend it doesn't feel good. It felt good to watch Darius Vance's smile finally fail him. It felt good to watch Reginald Robinson step toward the money and lose his daughter in the same motion. If you enjoyed those parts, you're human, and so am I. But I've lived long enough to notice something about that particular pleasure, and I'll be straight with you about it. The rush of watching someone get what they deserve is real, but it's short, and it leaves you a little emptier than it found you. And it teaches you the exact lesson the villains in the story already believe: that life is a scoreboard, that there are winners and losers, and the whole point is to make sure you're not the one on the floor picking up the glass. Imani didn't win by that scoreboard. She won by refusing to pick it up. That's the part I actually wanted you to carry out of here. Because here's the thing the Reginald Robinsons of the world never learn, and it costs them everything, every single time. They look at a person and they see a bank account, a job title, a used truck, a clearance dress, and they decide a human being's worth in the half-second it takes to read a price tag. And they are wrong. They are wrong about the handyman who was under an old woman's house at 4 in the morning so she could keep her oxygen running. They are wrong about the quiet daughter in the back bedroom who was worth more love than the whole family had the wisdom to give her. The measure of a person was never the number. It was never the number. It was how they treated the person who couldn't do anything for them. And I'll tell you one more true thing, and then I'll let you go. The reason a story like this hits the way it does is that most of us have been in that back bedroom. Most of us have folded ourselves smalls so somebody wouldn't swing. Most of us have knelt to pick up glass we didn't drop while a room full of people watched and filmed. If that's you, If you felt that one in your chest, I want you to hear the part of the story that isn't about millionaires and wills. Because that part was never coming for most of us. Hear the part where a woman found out she'd been walking around her whole life standing on rights. Nobody had told her she had. Hear the part where one letter, one phone call to the right person, changed everything, not by magic, but because she finally knew the ground under her feet was hers. That part is real. That part you can use. So let me leave you with something more useful than a happy ending. Because stories are wind if they don't put a tool in your hand on the way out. If you are pregnant and your job cuts your hours or pushes you out the day you ask for lighter duty, the way it happened to Imani, understand that, in the United States, that may be against federal law. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act and the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act protect your right to reasonable accommodation, and the agency that enforces it is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It costs you nothing to call them. The number is 1-800-669-4000. Write it down. Give it to the woman at your church who's afraid to say anything. Retaliation counts on your silence, and your silence is the one thing you never actually owe anybody. If someone in your life controls you through money, decides what you're worth, keeps you small and dependent and grateful for scraps, the way that house did to Imani for 29 years, that has a name. It's called financial abuse, and it's a recognized form of coercive control, and you do not have to be hit for it to be real. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. They will talk to you about money and control, not just bruises. It is free, and it is there all night, on the nights you need it most. And if you are older, or you love someone who is, and there is a Terrence in the family, circling an inheritance, pressuring a parent, isolating them, positioning themselves near the will, know that elder financial exploitation is a crime in every state, and the National Elder Fraud Hotline exists for exactly this. The number is 1-833-372-8311. A sharp old woman named Eula protected herself by planning early and documenting everything. Not everyone gets the chance. If you can be the one who helps them plan, be that one. Laws differ from state to state, and none of this is a substitute for a real attorney who knows your situation. Legal aid clinics exist in most cities, the kind Auntie Yolanda worked, and they will see you, whether or not you can pay. Ask. The asking is the whole thing. Imani's entire life changed the day she stopped folding and asked one question out loud to the right person. That's the story. A pocket watch, a back bedroom, a will built like a fortress by a woman who refused to be told where she could stand. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of it. If any piece of this landed somewhere real for you, leave a word below and tell me where you were listening from. And tell me the truth, the way Imani learned to. Somebody else scrolling through tonight, folded small in their own back bedroom, might need to read that they're not the only one. And they might need to hear the thing this whole story was only ever trying to say. You were never the number. You were never once the number.